10, and we have got a quorum, so we'll start. Just to let you know why I'm sitting here, it's because our chair is finally having something to eat, so we're going to let her have something to eat after the early morning session. So, look, it's around the review of citizens. So, look, where's our officers? Are they still having a... Nope, ladies, please come through.
No.
Oh, hold on, here we go. Oh, the local
Julia,
boards, here we go.
Lydia.
Yes, ladies and a gentleman. Here we go.
Peter Haynes.
Yeah, Peter. Tēnā koutou katoa to our local board chairs, and I'll leave it to you. Kia ora.
Well, thank you very much. We've worked out the program in which we'll speak. A couple of us have had to cancel other meetings while we've been waiting, though the debate's been interesting. Look, just a few points that we'd like to make on behalf of Hibiscus and Bays, but also I think representing a lot of the northern viewpoint, because we have discussed this matter as local boards. We have a number of concerns. We, to begin with, were consulted on the matter of whether we liked one model or another. We were given three options: an enhanced status quo model, which 9 local boards opted, or 10 local boards, once they all got it in, opted for. Locally driven funding, which was the boards actually taking on the funding, which surprised me, but only 2 supported that, and regional service provision, where you had 4 supporting that. But never were we ever asked about funding models. And we believe that we should be actually given the opportunity to comment on those funding models that were presented to the workshop. We believe that that's important because under a couple of those funding models, we would see in the North Shore side of the CAB operation 1 to 2 centres closing, which would really concern us. We believe that where possible, because you've got the opportunity to address this, you're right in the LTP review stage, and we'd like to see a base level of funding actually being increased for this service and to allow for growth in those areas not properly covered at the moment, as Lydia's local board most certainly hasn't been. But here what we're doing, or seem to be doing as a council, is just reallocating the money that's there already without actually looking at this. This city is growing. I know you've been applying an inflation index, but maybe a growth index should be part of the whole process too. But we'd like the opportunity to actually give some feedback to you on it. I'd just like to very briefly comment on the submission from the Auckland JP Association. I'm a member of that association, but I was told quite recently that only half of JPs are, and of course there's a cost to that. And talking to our local bureaus, very few of them actually source their JPs from the association. They actually have volunteers who are also JPs. Many of them are also CAB volunteers. And I didn't hear the full presentation he gave in. I came in at the second half, but I was astounded because our volunteers and our CABs don't have any travel expenses paid, and for many coming to our Hibiscus Centre, which covers part of the Rodney local board area too, some of those petrol costs are quite high. So I don't know where he plucked the $100,000 figure that he was wanting, and if it was to come from the already poor budget that's there, we would have some grave concerns. So that's the view of my local board, and I'd like to thank you, and I'm sorry, but I do have to go. I was meant to be at a meeting very shortly that's going to take place in Browns Bay. So thank you.
Yeah. Tēnā koe, Mr. Chairman. Tēnā koutou members. Thank you very much for the opportunity on Malo. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you, and I must I'll be very brief. I've been very delinquent. We didn't get our feedback back on the second round of consultation. So I'll confirm that my local board prefers option 1, which of course is quite consistent with the detailed submission we made earlier. But there are just a couple of qualifications. I'll be very brief about it. We do support, in principle, certainly the idea that deprivation should be recognised where there is a demonstrated need. The major issue we have here is that there's no evidence in the report about either the nature of any unmet need or demand, not quite the same thing, or the extent of any unmet need or demand. There are assertions made about, which I support, about how the need is complicated and deprived, relatively deprived areas is complicated, and there might be more of it, but there's no actual evidence, and it may very well be that central government provides, as some people have suggested, central government provides more services in areas of relative deprivation. So you would then think that there'd be less need. And I have no idea how the extent to which this is true, but nor does anybody else at the table really. And so the lesson, I think, is that more work needs to be done. Otherwise, you're making a stab in the dark. So I'd urge you to give some thought to this, and also to the fact that we are going to need to increase the funding overall. There is a demonstrated, nowhere do I see any evidence that there is any unnecessary spending or anything, quite the reverse in our area. My local board, as so many others do, provides furniture and various other things like that, because the budget just doesn't cover it. So I do think you need to give some, or recognise that you are going to need. We've had 7 years under this council alone of rapid growth and not really much increase at all in the budget. Yeah, I also think that we need to be mindful that we're dealing with a volunteer-led community organisation. It is independent of council, and that any perception that council is not operating as a respectful partner may engender an adverse reaction amongst the volunteers. So I also urge you to give some consideration to recognising the value, the extent to which council appreciates the work that the CABs do in any resolution. I think it should be reflected. We do, of course, at the local level. We tell them all the time what a wonderful job they're doing, but maybe that message needs to come from the council as a whole. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak as well, and te alofa to our governing committee members. And I know you've had a very busy morning, so I'm going to just highlight in terms of Māngere Ōtāhuhu Local Board, who have pretty much been in the forefront of the conversation of the Citizens Advice Bureau. Can I just say I want to endorse my colleagues who have spoken earlier with regards to the value and the contribution that Citizens Advice Bureau makes across the region. And I think, just speaking earlier to the Mayor, it is a question that Auckland Council has to advocate that central government cannot ignore the necessity of the service and probably help us with the funding formula. And so for Māngere Ōtāhuhu, we originally had one bureau, and because the community and the extent of service, we could not ignore that Ōtāhuhu was just glaring at us, and hence our contribution as a local board to fund the Ōtāhuhu agency. I want to refer to the recommendations that are before the committee, and our board certainly would be championing and supporting option 3 to make that clear, because we do value that there is a strategic relationship that this committee requires to maintain and that local boards have somewhat limited capacity, whereas the funding comes from Auckland Council to the ACAB. I do just want to allude to the earlier presentation from ACAB and CAB. I noted that it was interesting where the comment was made when you close another bureau, if you want to open another bureau because there is a need, you need to close one. Well, in our patch, Papatoetoe was closed, and I want to ask, where did that 80K go? But I'll leave that there. Coming back to the recommendations, we would support the equity. So deprivation must be recognised. In a workshop that I attended last week, when you looked at the client ethnicity, over 56% was the diverse population, Māori, Pasifika, Asian. Nearly 60% of the clientele who access citizens' advice bureaus across the region came from that factor. That cannot be ignored, committee. There needs to be that evidence available for committee members to ask questions to our officers. So I just want to leave that there. And what local boards can do, as local boards currently do, is strongly support bureaus in their own areas. So the funding formula, as you have pointed out, Madam Chair, cannot be decreased. The apportion, we as a local board recognise the fact that, okay, we've had to support the opening of Otahu Agency, but that's because as a local board we could not ignore what the community and the good work of Citizens Advice Bureau. And lastly, Madam Chair, strongly support that local boards are autonomous, they have the autonomy, they are robust, and they're pretty wonderful with the things that they do on the ground. However, this must be supported by a regional network in terms of the framework. And so our board would be supporting those things in terms of just the comments that I have made. And I just wanted to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak. Whawhtai.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the chairs that have spoken. I just had one question for Le Maunga. You know the funding that Māngere Otahu have given for the Otahu Citizens Advice Bureau, is that like for 1 year, or is that ongoing funding that your board has allocated for the Bureau?
So thank you, Councillor, for the question. So currently the total for that 3-year term was 81 in total, but hence why we were coming to the committee to review the funding formula decision. So we need to wait for the committee's decision and then the conversations in terms of a strategic apportionment at the ACAB level, because it's a need that we have recognised. So we will have to wait for the committee's decision and the ongoing work of Auckland Council officers and then see where we end up. But we've been forced into the earlier position. Hope that answers your question.
Our staff up to present, and it's a good chance to clarify some of those issues that have been raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christine Olsen, and I am the manager of the Community Empowerment Unit. I have with me today Carol Blacklock and Trudy Farver, who have undertaken this review. I do have a brief presentation. I know we spoke in detail at a workshop last week, but just to reiterate a few of the key messages. How do I work this? Okay, so just really want to remind you that the review was when we went to the Regional Strategy and Policy Committee 2 years ago to ask for the funding to be continued for another 2 years. 2 of the local boards spoke at that committee and raised a number of issues around their concerns around the fairness of the current funding, including its lack of provision for deprivation and the ability to open new sites in response to changing needs and demographics. So the committee asked us to undertake a review specifically to consult with the 21 local boards on the issues raised and regarding the funding to achieve greater equity and fairness, taking into consideration the social issues in local communities. So the review was very much about seeking feedback from local boards. It was an internal review, so we didn't consult with local bureau or with other stakeholders. Throughout the review process, we have worked with CAB-NZ and ACAB and have kept them informed and briefed them on options, including sharing all the local board feedback and all the presentations that we've developed. As part of our strategic relationship agreement with ACAB, we have set up a governing group which is made up of 2 members of council, 2 members of ACAB, and the CE of CAB-NZ attends when it's necessary. That governing group has had 10 meetings and the review has been discussed in every one of those meetings. We've had 4 full board workshops that have been half a day each, and 1 special meeting following the AGM to share draft options and get feedback. As well as that, we've made 5 formal requests for feedback on information provided and had formal responses from both ACAB and CAB-NZ to each of those. Under the current population-based funding model, funding does not vary to accommodate decisions to open new services in new locations. So under the current model, it's very difficult to be responsive to growth and changing needs. Bureau need to either fund a new site themselves or seek funding from a donor or from a local board. So that's the situation that's occurred in Otahuhu. And if a decision is made that there is a need for a new outreach service, then that decision is between that local bureau and CAB-NZ. So, sorry, CAB-NZ is the national body. So it's a local decision, but there is no additional funding because the funding is population-based. Oh, is she? Thank you. So this slide is an attempt to just show the situation. So the blue boxes are individual bureau, and they are members of and report to CAB-NZ. And then ACAB is the local body that Auckland Council has the formal relationship with through the strategic relationship agreement and funding agreement, and ACAB receives the funding and distribute it to those bureaus, so those blue boxes. So each bureau is a member of CAB-NZ, is an incorporated not-for-profit and has their own board, and they report to CAB-NZ. ACAB is a membership organisation and influences rather than directs bureau or local service provision. And the ACAB board is comprised of representatives from each of the clusters. So when we did 2 rounds of consultation with local boards. The first round was to seek their feedback, and the second round was to propose options. So when we sought feedback, some of the key things that came through were that they value the service of Citizens Advice Bureau. They think that it's a high quality service and that it contributes to local board plan outcomes. Council funding is leveraged significantly as services are delivered by well-trained, approachable, multilingual and knowledgeable volunteers. And a strong view that people are connected with information and services that would otherwise be out of reach to them, and that this was especially true for migrants, older people, international students and those from lower socioeconomic groups. And what they felt could be improved was that most local boards want to strengthen the relationship with their local bureau and receive better local information. Now, I would just say that some local boards expressed quite strongly that they have very good local relationships, but then a number of others said they wanted that to be improved. Some local boards wanted more funding for CABs. Some local boards wanted funding to be more equitable, particularly to take into account deprivation. And some local boards want the CAB to be more responsive to their community's needs. And just one thing I would point out, apologies that the Orake local board's resolution was left out of the attachments in error. Oh. Okay, so that's, I think you've now got that. But that was definitely taken into consideration when we did our work. Okay, thank you. So these are our recommendations, and I just want to talk you through them. Number one is to develop a local relationship framework, and that's particularly in response to the feedback from local boards that they would like a strengthened relationship with their local bureau. So that would focus on how that relationship would work and how reporting would happen and the nature of that reporting. The second recommendation is to improve reporting and access to data. Now, a lot of work's been done on that front already, but there's still more to do, and depending on the outcome of today will go some way to determine how that work, what the focus of that work going forward. So the third recommendation is the funding formula. There's a number of things that I would just comment on here. So at the moment, the population-based funding is based on census data. So the current census data is from 2013. We feel that using Statistics New Zealand data, which is updated every year, would be a better method of accessing that population formula. So that's one thing. We are recommending a usage, a 25% of the formula be based on usage, and this would go some way to reflect other factors that drive service demand, such as people attending a CAB near their place of work rather than where they live, and places where there is high volume of workers, like the CBD or the airport. There's a view that people don't necessarily go to the bureau where they live. We've heard ACAB's concerns about the usage formula, and I think so. It's based on 300,000 visits over a year. I think some of those concerns about short visits versus long visits would be averaged out with that number of visits. But we could also look at doing some more work on, how we actually calculate that usage. So what constitutes an interview versus pop in to ask to use the toilet, for example. And also I think it would be important to try and understand, to get some good data on what's JP visits versus other things. And the deprivation, so the 5% deprivation, 5%, sorry, the reason we've chosen that is because that's how the LDI formula is calculated. So we figured that there's already a formula, there's already data, so it would be reasonably easy to apply it. And I would just add that everything we've proposed is based on available official data, so it's either come from Statistics New Zealand data or it's the deprivation index that's calculated by council. The other thing about the population-based funding is that there's currently 2 areas where funding is applied differently. So there's 2 areas where there are no CAB offices, 2 local board areas, and one of those is Upper Harbour and the other one is Franklin. At the moment, all of the Upper Harbour funding goes to CAB North Shore, and no, Franklin isn't included in the population data. We know that we hypothesise that some of the Upper Harbour area probably go to some of the West Bureau. So what we're proposing is that the population of Upper Harbour be split half North Shore and half CAB Waitakere, and that the population of Franklin be included in the formula, because it isn't currently. And then recommendation 4 is an attempt the development of the regional network provision framework would be reflected in the new strategic relationship agreement between Council and ACAB, and would also involve CAB NZ, individual bureau and local boards. So that would be an attempt to look at, from a regional perspective, where is the need and how do we rationalise and address that need. So just some very brief background. There's currently 31 CAB sites in the Auckland region. Council funded in this financial year 1.8 million, which includes an annual CPI adjustment. And then there's also support in kind given, which is for accommodation, utilities and maintenance costs. And local boards, so you've heard Ōtahuhu talk about, Māngere Ōtahuhu local board have given 81,000 in the last 3 years. As well as that, over the last 3 years, there's been another 92,000 given by local boards to various bureau. Yeah, and I guess the Māngere Ōtahuhu local board have expressed a strong view that they would like Toia, the Ōtahuhu site at Toia, to be funded from the regional grant that ACAB distributes. So this is just a recap of the top 10 interview categories that the Auckland CAB sites, so the reason for visits, and that makes up about 60%, 62% of inquiries, so the rest are mainly online inquiries. The CAB data that we have shows that at least 25% of interviews are for issues that are central government related, and as well as that, we hypothesise that a significant portion of the legal inquiries are probably central government related issues, but we don't know that. So this is my final slide, and this is just to show you the difference from this year if we apply the funding model that we are proposing, what effect that would have. As a funder, Council can set the conditions for funding and how it is distributed. So as per the resolution, we've undertaken this exercise from a perspective of fairness and equity of distribution of the current funding envelope. We've tried to take a regional perspective that considers local variation in issues. The proposed formula seeks to achieve best value and provide services to the community where most needed. And ACAB have told us that they are prepared to consider any model proposed by Council on the basis that changes are fair and equitable to individual bureau, are able to be implemented and meet the CAB NZ membership principles. Thank you.
Councillor Newman.
As I understand it, the problem definition for this review seems really to have been based on the recommendation from the resolution from the Whole of Health Council Committee, which is set out in para 10 of the report, which is about seeking information from staff for the review of service, etc. In that recommendation, it refers to take into consideration social issues in local communities across Auckland. To me, growth is a social issue, but I don't really think this review and the problem definition of it adequately addressed the growth question. I'm wondering, do the officers have a view whether a further work stream is required to address the growth question, noting the matters that have been raised about the need, as local boards are identifying it, for new CAB sites?
So, through you, Madam Chair, option 3 was an attempt to do that. So option 3 was to work with, sorry, I'll just get the wording. Yeah, so option 3 would work with ACAB, CAB-NZ and Local Bureau to do a comprehensive review of the service and needs in Auckland.
But you haven't really landed on that from what I can gather.
Well, that wasn't the preferred option from most local boards.
I'm just from the staff's, from the officers' professional advice is, notwithstanding what the boards think, is that a work stream that needs further inquiry to inform advice, maybe through the 10-year plan, but needs to address this for the very reason that there, as Auckland grows, there are communities that are going to require services, and if voluntary services in a bureau are valuable, then that needs to be picked up.
There was significant concerns raised around option 3 and the resourcing of option 3 and the impact and effect that CAB-NZ and ACAB thought it would have on the service, on the volunteers, the amount of change, and also the impartiality of the independent nature of the service.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 questions. My first is around comments that you've made around the usage in CAB that you're saying that you believe that 25% of the engagement may be on central government issues, and significantly many of the people who go to CAB are also on legal issues that may have central government content. To that end, why aren't you suggesting as one of your recommendations that we lobby central government to review their funding? You reflect it in telling us what funding comes from central government, which I note that was questioned by CAB-NZ as to its accuracy. But I just wondered why that's not part of your recommendations.
It wasn't the scope of the review. The scope of the review was to seek feedback from local boards with a view to addressing fairness and equity.
Okay.
Do you want to?
My second. Oh, okay.
Sorry, I was just gonna, no, that's all right.
Because it wasn't part of the view, I kind of accept that. My second point is that if the scope of your review was to seek local board feedback and local community feedback, and that feedback overwhelmingly, i.e. 9 to the second, which was 4, was for option 1, you still went for option 3. You're suggesting option 3, which is population usage and deprivation, which well, that's what I'm reading. Am I reading it wrong, Madam Chair? So feedback on draft options local board, option 1, enhanced status quo, and then option 3, page 17. The enhanced status quo, it says in the report, was preferred by 9 local boards. The regional service provision was preferred by 4 local boards, and locally driven was preferred by 2 local boards. So I'm interested, if the majority of local boards went for one option, what was your overriding factor that overrid that the majority of local boards and their feedback, bearing in mind that was the major scope of the review?
So the proposed option that we've put forward in the recommendations is for enhanced status quo, option 1, and to that we added a component of option 3 to try and work through and address regional service provision through the strategic relationship agreement over the next term.
If I may, so have you gone back to local boards and said, we've asked you for your opinion, you've told us this, we've tooted around with it and come back with this. What do you think of that? Have you gone back the second time?
We have had 2 rounds of consultations with local boards, so we prepared draft options for feedback on the basis that we would develop a proposed option for the recommendations, and the proposed option has taken into account all the feedback we received from local boards in November.
So what I'm still struggling with is I don't know what the local boards think of the second round. I know what they think of the first round, but I don't know what they think of the second round.
It's in the attachments and
sorry?
all the feedback from
So
the
is that the
November.
is that the second round? That was my question.
That was the second
Right,
round.
got it. So I do, right.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. It is kind of complicated, this one, seemingly simple on the surface, but takes a little bit of digging through. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a very specific question because I feel very comfortable with the recommendations 2, 3 and 4. So my question's around recommendation 1. And because in your presentation you've talked about how you involved the CABX in the consultation process. You're quite clear about what you went around, what you did there. You also mentioned that you could do some further work around perhaps defining usage, if I've heard you correctly there, so I heard that invitation there. But what we heard this morning, I'm sure you heard it too, is that organisation doesn't seem to be bought into this process in a way that perhaps is indicated by your presentation and the report. So my question is fairly simple, is that what effect, if today we basically supported all these recommendations, but in recommendation 1 there was a modification to say to allow you time to do some work with that organisation, CABX, to come up with a formula. It may be very, very similar to the one you've got. It may just have a tighter definition on usage. For example, they talked about the amount of time spent on queries, or it could include some other factors. But if we allow that opportunity for you today, what effect is that going to have in terms of your further work in the rollout of this program? Is it going to hinder it, or could it possibly enhance a better solution?
Sure, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, recommendation 1 is really about a relationship framework for local bureau with their local boards.
Not option 1.
Oh.
In your recommendations, point
okay.
number 1.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right.
Just
Sure.
to be clear there.
Thank you.
So the timeframes that we're working to are the funding agreement and strategic relationship agreements, both expire in June 18. So we need to put new agreements in place and negotiate those agreements within the time period. We do understand that if there are changes made to the distribution of funding that ACAB receives, there may be a need for a phased implementation of that. Also, there would be the opportunity to look at inquiries and what is meant by inquiries, whether that's short form, long form interviews, JPs, the breakdown of that data. We could investigate that further.
Okay. Thank you. Just a quick follow on there, Madam Chair, if I may. If there was agreement reached by those timelines that you've just indicated in principle by that organisation, if we asked you to go back now and have a relook with them, okay, and to gain in principle agreement with them, is that something that could possibly work within that time frame if we got onto it straight away? Would you be willing to do that?
Certainly willing, and yeah, I guess within the feel free to jump in, within the yeah, thank you, of that we may need to phase in, so we could start working on it. I think some of the data isn't there yet, and we would have to work to collect it over the next 12 months.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a result of that, I'd just like to foreshadow that I might make an amendment or improvement to that recommendation A1 that I'll forward to you.
Thank you. I just had a quick query, if you could clarify. You talked about census data and the data, where the data is taken from, and then you had a statement around Stats New Zealand data and possibly a difference. Are you able just to explain what you meant by that?
Just clarifying that the census data is 2013, so we'd be able to, by using the Statistics New Zealand annual estimates, we'll be able to reflect any sort of any growth in between census data. So it all comes through Stats New Zealand.
Right, okay. Can I just supplementary to that, Chair? The Counties Manukau DHB believe that the census data for the South was underreported by 24,000 people. I'm just wondering how you might take that into account when considering a funding regime for CAB.
I think the funding formula would have to use the Statistics New Zealand data as it stands. I understand that's also used for LDI funding as well, so we're trying to line up to be consistent across Council's funding.
Cool. Thanks, Chair.
I don't have a question, but I'm happy to second Councillor Sayre's amendment. I'd like to speak to that. I'd like to speak to it. Why I would like to second it. I can speak now. Oh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to see the amendment soon, whenever that's coming. But I do have some questions. I know that I've met with a couple of you, and I've also met with some of the Rana and Joan from CAB. I have some concerns about, like, I understand where the model is going. You're trying to make it fairer in certain ways, and obviously when models change, it becomes unfair or a perception of unfair for others. But I am concerned about the big jump. I know there's the discussion of there was money for Upper Harbour, but that didn't eventuate. But it's quite a big jump for North Shore because they're funded as a cluster, so they will be expecting that funding and probably planning for it, and then suddenly it's quite a big jump. So are you able to explain a bit more to me around what looks like quite a big reduction for the North Shore cluster?
Sure. So when ACAB was formed and they adopted the population-based funding model, there was a transition of 4 years of funding for all bureau. So over that period of time, based on the estimates, the North Shore Cluster 2 received a 59% increase of funding over those 4 years. The recommendation that we're proposing today does decrease the funding to the North Shore to CAB North Shore to around 16%. So it is a decrease, but nothing as significant as they've faced in increases over the last 4 years.
And the main the reasons for the big decrease in one go?
So that is looking at the populations of Upper Harbour and where the clients are accessing services. So we understand from CAB North Shore reporting there's about 5,000 Upper Harbour residents that access the service through Barons Bay. Massey CAB report in a different way and collect different statistics. But we understand that there are a significant number of clients that will be accessing the services in West Cape coming through.
We've got ACAB saying another thing, and we've got some of the individual CABs saying something else. And I think what we're trying to do, with the greatest of respect to all of this, we've got the LTP for the long-term decision on CAB, more money or same money, that LTP discussion. at the moment, we're trying to work out within the envelope that we're working on, how do we most equitably deliver resources to the region, and where we need to, members, steer between the people who are going to get more are saying, yeah, this is actually really good, and the people who are going to get less are saying this is really bad. So I guess we're just trying to work out we're trying to work out something that we can explain to everybody so that it feels that we're not picking sides. And I think acknowledging Councillor Sayers trying to sort of step through this. So excuse me for being a bit diverted by a moment, if I just try and understand the very complex amendment that Councillor Sayers is putting together. So in the meantime, we'll keep taking questions. I've got Councillor Watson, Mayor Goff, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Filipaina. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. In the discussions with the CAB or the representatives, what was the feedback of the North Shore CABs and indeed the northern CABs, which together form a significant hunk of the CABs across Auckland? What was their feedback in terms of what the effect of a approximately, in the North Shore case anyway, $50,000 reduction per year in their funding? What would that mean for their various CAB branches and their operations? Did they give any feedback on that?
We didn't consult with local bureau as part of the review. That wasn't part of the scope.
Okay, but I'm assuming that someone was looking or feeding back in terms of what these proposed changes that would come about by the different models would bring. I mean, surely there was some detail in that to make it meaningful, i.e. what would happen if we do this to the North Shore CABs? What does that mean for their operation or their number of branches?
We did provide indicative funding to ACAB for comment, but they did not provide the impact, I guess, for individual sort of clusters or bureau.
Okay, so I guess, Madam Chair, the first obvious point that would emerge from that is that there is a need to look at that clearly, because we conceivably could end up in a situation whereby there's a devastating effect on any number of CABs, and some of them could conceivably disappear. The thing I'm also having trouble reconciling is the questions of growth and accommodating demand. Now, I know in particular in my ward, but also other parts of the North Shore, where there is phenomenal growth in numbers and there's phenomenal growth in a specific demand. So, for instance, if we talk about new migrants, and particularly people from various parts of Asia who are quite eager to avail themselves of these services and who are quite demanding in that. I know that as a teacher at parent interviews, quite often it was the new people, new migrants who made a big demand both in terms of time and numerically. So I'm having trouble knowing the population dynamics of my ward and reconciling a reduction with the growth in numbers and a growth in real demand. And by real demand, I mean people having to sit down, discuss a given issue with people, not just the number of people coming, chapping at the door.
Just step in for a sec. I'm actually just going to take the chair's prerogative. We're actually going to go round and round in circles here. We're conflating, and we've been unable to separate the LTP discussion, the discussion of impact on individual local CABs, and the fact that us as a governing body, and this will annoy the local CABs out there, our relationship isn't with the local CABs. Ours is with the sum of money, the funding formula, and the way that we then give that through to ACAB. How that all then impacts and filters down is worked through with the individual hubs and ACAB. My sense, though, is I don't have enough clarity. We've now got 6 different amendments, everyone trying to achieve everything else. I'm going to move that we let this lie on the table. Second. I think we need to actually go back to and discuss some of this so that we get some sense of what the CABs are saying, what the ACAB is saying, what our local boards are saying, because what I don't want us to do after all this time, and I apologise for all of you who've waited, sometimes I watch us rush into a bit of a half-assed, it looks good on paper approach, and it sometimes is actually not helpful. So I'm recommending, it's been moved and seconded, that this lie on the table. I think if anything we're a little bit clearer about what the discussion is that we need to have. So that's an operational issue. I'm going to put that recommendation. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. Against? No, well we don't discuss, this is like the motion be put. So I'm going to do that again. The ayes, if there are any noes? No? Okay, well the ayes have it on voice. We will come back next month having had a slightly more joined up discussion. I just want to thank our staff who've put a huge amount of time and energy into this. Sadly we had a workshop but we didn't have a great turnout where we could have actually thrashed this out. So my apologies to our busy CABers out there. I think we'll do better if we just put a bit of energy into it. Thank you, staff. Let's draw a little veil over that and come back with a more rational discussion.